The wind over the Wyoming Territory had a voice of its own, dry, low, and haunted. It whistled through the skeletal trees and sighed across the red-dusted canyon flats like a ghost remembering something it could never forget. In the summer of 1887, folks said that voice carried rumors, and the most persistent of them whispered about a girl, chained behind a cabin in Dustbone Hollow. They said she was cursed, that she had slit a man's throat with a button hook, or maybe ran off from a preacher's wedding in Laramie with the collection plate. Others claimed she wasn't real at all, just a heat-borne fever dream to make cowards feel brave. But the ranchers knew better. So did the drifters and the old ladies who kept loaded rifles beside their flour sacks. A few had seen her just a flicker through the cracks in old timber, staring out with eyes that didn't blink. No one had gone close. Carson Flint's gang made sure of that. The cabin leaned crooked in the brush like a thing forgotten by God. Its roof sagged with rot, walls bloated from years of storm and sun, and all around it, the land cracked open with heat. Sagebrush rattled in the dry wind like bones in a gambler's cup. Just behind the cabin, tethered to a splintered post by an iron chain looped through her ankle, sat the girl. She looked about 17, though the sun and silence had aged her. Her skin was pale under the dirt, her hair a tangle of straw and shadow. She had not spoken in weeks, nor tried to run. Her feet were cut and blooded from the gravel, and the crust of old tears had drawn tight lines on her face like etched stone. She stared west at every sunset, never flinching when the coyotes howled, never moving when Flint's boys laughed too close. They brought her food sometimes, stale bread, boiled beans, or a slug of water from a bottle they'd spit in first. One even tried to touch her once. He didn't have fingers anymore. No one knew her name. No one, until the cowboy came. He rode in under a sky baked white, his silhouette rising slow over the ridgeline like smoke from a dying fire. His horse was a gray Appaloosa with cracked hooves and eyes that watched like it understood too much. The man himself looked like time had carved him from desert rock, broad-shouldered, hollow-eyed, with skin the color of old brass, and a limp in his right leg that matched the rhythm of his spurs. Dust clung to his coat, his hat brim frayed with age. A leather satchel hung by his saddle, filled with something heavy and quiet. When he stepped off his horse in the heart of Dustbone Hollow, silence followed him like a second shadow. Folks looked away. Children disappeared behind barrels. Even the gang, lounging outside the saloon, straightened just enough to remember the feel of their holsters. He walked with slow purpose, tipping his hat at no one. His name passed in whispers, Silas. The word landed soft, like ash, but it burned just the same. No one knew where he came from. Some said Kansas, others claimed Texas, but none could place him for sure. He didn't drink much, didn't gamble. He traded 2 deer hides and a strip of cured jerky for a room above the mercantile, then sat out front sharpening a knife that had a notch for every soul he'd sent on. But at dusk, when the sun bled orange behind the hills and Dustbone turned to shadow, Silas moved. He walked down past the church ruins, past the blacksmith's silent anvil, and toward the edge of town, where the land sagged with despair. The cabin was waiting. The girl didn't look up at first. She never did anymore. But something in the hush of his boots made her glance. He didn't flinch. Their eyes locked through the dim, hers wide and rimmed with fear, his lined with something older, harder, but not unkind. He saw the chain. He saw the raw skin. He saw the ghosts in her silence, and didn't ask a single thing. She braced, expecting a blow, a cruel grin, or some game like Flint's men liked to play. But the man just looked at her like he'd known her all his life. He took one step forward. The chain clinked. She curled in on herself, like a whipcord ready to snap. His hand hovered slowly, deliberately, and reached into his coat. She tensed. He pulled out a small cloth bundle and dropped it in the dirt near her. Inside was jerky, a tin of water, and a folded strip of gauze. She blinked. That was all. Then, he leaned in slightly, voice low like a prayer murmured in a storm. "Tomorrow," he said. His voice cracked like dry leather. "Be ready." And just like that, he turned. No dramatic bow, no hero's wink. Just the soft crunch of his boots as he walked back into the dark, the wind swallowing him whole. The girl didn't sleep that night. She sat with the cloth in her lap, fingers twitching over the water, the jerky. Her stomach burned, her throat dry from fear more than thirst. Something in her had long since broken, but now it twitched. Twitched like a trapped thing waking up. Dawn would come. So would the blood. She could feel it. And for the first time since her world went dark, she hoped. Carson Flint ruled Dustbone, hollow the way vultures rule a carcass, without mercy, and always circling. He didn't need laws. He made his own. With a face cut from gristle and a voice like gravel in a whiskey glass, Carson had turned the dying mining town into his own personal hellscape. Men followed him not out of loyalty, but out of fear, and because they had nowhere else left to go. They called themselves the Hollow Riders, 8 in all, not counting Flint. Each one wore a red scrap tied around their wrist or boot, a mark of bloodshed. There was Cutter Joe, who once skinned a man alive for a debt unpaid. One-Eyed Mitch, with a twitchy trigger finger and a body count higher than the creek's flood line. Grady and Lyle, twin brothers who smiled like wolves and drank like broken wells. The rest were no better, gunmen, rustlers, and killers with bones in their pasts. The girl behind the cabin, Mary Beth, wasn't just a prisoner. She was a warning, a monument to Flint's wrath. A rancher had hidden her after a raid went south. When Flint caught wind, he burned the ranch to cinders, shot the man in front of his wife, and dragged the girl back by her hair. She'd been chained ever since. Settlers knew better than to intervene. Even Sheriff Burke, who once wore a badge with pride, now turned his eyes away and tipped his hat low. A marshal had come through a month back, young and fresh-eyed. He made it as far as the saloon before they strung him from a mesquite branch, his star pinned to a tree like a joke. Still, whispers moved like dust on the wind. Folks murmured in cellars, behind locked doors. Someone would rise. Someone would break the chain. But no one knew when, and no one dared first. High above Dustbone, in a canyon chiseled from ancient storms, Silas knelt by the fire. It was a small flame, shielded by rock, more ember than blaze. His rifle lay across his knees, polished and loaded. Beside it, a Bowie knife gleamed under moonlight. His fingers moved with calm precision, wrapping leather straps, testing triggers, fitting rounds like a preacher prepping for Sunday prayer. An old journal rested on a flat stone beside him. The cover was cracked, edges singed, and the pages within were littered with names, each one a ghost, crossed out in thick red ink. Carson Flint. That name was the last one still alive. Silas ran a thumb across the ink. His jaw clenched. Somewhere in the hills behind him, coyotes wailed. He didn't flinch. 12 years back, he'd worn a star too. U.S. Marshal out of Colorado Territory. Flint had been a scout under his command, part of a covert takedown of a gun-running operation. But Flint had other plans. Gold changed hands. Orders were betrayed. By the time Silas got to his ranch, the place was burning. His wife, his son, nothing left but ash and screaming silence. They'd left him for dead, a bullet in his gut and a badge shattered beneath his body. But Silas had crawled, survived, and hunted. He'd cut them down one by one, Flint's old crew, scattered across the territories. But Mary Beth, that was different. She wasn't just another soul in peril. She was the daughter of Marshal Gideon Tepp, Silas's old partner. Gideon had saved Silas's life twice. Mary Beth had been just a child when her father died. Now she was a prisoner. And Silas, he was the reckoning coming at dawn. He closed the journal, saddled up. The sky groaned with thunder far off. Storms gathering. Fitting. The ride down into Dustbone was silent, save for the wind dragging dust in long, whispering streams. Silas dismounted behind the thicket near the cabin. Flint's men were where he hoped, drunk on moonshine and victory, sprawled across the porch or passed out in the saloon. The town was hushed, waiting for something it didn't understand. The cabin loomed in darkness, its wood warped and crooked like a drunk preacher's cross. Mary Beth lay in the dirt, half-conscious, the chain still wrapped cruelly around her ankle. He crouched beside her, hands gentle. She woke with a jolt, her wild eyes locking onto his. He pressed a finger to his lips, then handed her a small blade, thin, sharp, curved like a silver crescent. "Run north," he whispered. "Stay low. Wait for 3 gunshots. She hesitated, eyes flickering with disbelief. But then she nodded. Just once. As she slipped into the brush, Silas stood, turned, and walked toward the saloon. The wooden steps creaked beneath his boots. A piano was playing badly inside. Laughter. Flint's voice. Silas pushed the door open with a whisper. The saloon went still. Flint looked up from his chair, a half-full glass in hand. He smiled like a man who thought he'd seen every kind of ghost. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "You already are," Silas replied. The draw was fast. 2 men stood. 2 shots rang out. Both dropped before their pistols cleared leather. Screams. Scrambling. Flint dove behind a table. Silas moved like a storm, cutting through the haze, a machine of memory and fire. Gunpowder filled the air, thick as fog. A bullet tore through Silas's side, spinning him into a post. He grunted, blood blooming beneath his coat, but he didn't fall. "Carson," he shouted. Flint didn't answer. He was already running. Silas staggered after him, past broken chairs and shattered bottles, out into the night where Mary Beth once stood chained. Her locket was still on the ground, glinting in the dirt. The chase led into the dry creek, moonlight pale and brittle on the rocks. Flint turned, firing wildly. Silas dropped low. Fired once. The shot echoed like thunder across the canyon walls. Flint dropped to his knees, hands at his chest. The blood came fast. He looked up at Silas with disbelief. "You were dead." "Not yet," Silas said. Flint fell without grace. The silence that followed wasn't peace. It was something heavier. Final. Silas lowered the gun. His knees gave, and he collapsed beside a boulder, pressing his hand to his wound. His breath came short. The stars above swam. Footsteps approached. Barefoot. Soft. Mary Beth stood beside him. Tears streaked her face, but her chin was high. She looked down at him, like a daughter remembering a father she never knew. "You came," she whispered. He smiled, wincing. "Told you. Be ready." And then the wind carried his breath away, like it had always known it would. Morning came slow to Dustbone Hollow, dragging itself across the blood-soaked dirt like a wounded animal. Smoke drifted from the saloon ruins. The wind moved without song. Not even the crows dared speak. The town, once snarling and alive with cruelty, had fallen into a hush so deep it felt like the world itself had paused to hold its breath. Mary Beth came back before the sun reached its peak, barefoot and hollow-eyed, moving through the silence like a ghost returning to her own grave. Her feet ached. Her breath stung, but her legs did not falter. She found him beside his horse, slumped against a rock, one hand still gripping his side, the other resting near the rifle he hadn't had the strength to lift again. The blood had stopped running. It had dried, dark and crusted along his ribs. But he was alive. Barely. His eyes fluttered open when she knelt beside him. For a moment, he looked past her, as if seeing something beyond this world. Then he smiled, crooked and tired. "You made it," he rasped. She nodded, tears slipping without sound. "You stayed. Promised, didn't I?" His fingers trembled as he reached into his coat and pulled free a folded square of yellowing paper. A map. "Cheyenne. Marshal's office. Give them this. They'll find what's left of them. Clean up the rot." Mary Beth took it with both hands. He watched her for a moment longer, then pulled something else from his coat. A metal star, tarnished, but unmistakable. A badge. He pressed it into her palm. "They'll listen to you," he whispered. "They have to." She hesitated. "What's your name?" Her voice broke with the weight of it. "Your real name." His eyes softened. A breath left him like a secret too long held. "Doesn't matter now." That was the last thing he said. She buried him beneath a gnarled cottonwood by the creek, where the wind spoke in gentle sighs, and the roots reached deep. She laid his rifle beside him and placed a flat stone over his grave. No name. No marker. Just silence and sky. She didn't cry until night, when the coyotes howled and the stars blinked down like watchful gods. She let the grief rise like a storm inside her chest. But only for a while. By dawn, she was riding north. The badge sat snug against her chest, tucked inside the fold of her blouse. Around her neck, she now wore the chain that once bound her, fastened into a crude locket, with a lock of hair inside and a strip of cloth torn from Silas's coat. She didn't look back. Along the journey, she spoke only when needed. She bartered with tanners, shared fires with freighters, and slept beneath open skies. But at night, around dwindling flames or inside crowded bunkhouses, she told stories. Not about herself. About him. The man with thunder in his eyes and ghosts on his trail. The cowboy who came like a storm and left like a whisper. She never gave his name, but she made sure no one forgot the story. Years passed. Time drifted through the hollow like wind through bones, wearing the sharp edges smooth. The saloon burned down, never rebuilt. The gang scattered, most dead or hunted into hiding. Flint's old shack fell into rot and ruin, the chain behind it rusting until it snapped on its own. Then, one spring morning, a new rider came into Dustbone Hollow. She wore a gray hat with a wide brim and rode a black mare that moved like ink on stone. Her coat was long, pinned with a single badge that gleamed under the sun. Her eyes were sharp, not cruel, but sharp, like steel honed by grief and tempered with justice. She stopped outside the old mercantile and dismounted slow. The townsfolk watched from porches and windows, hands half lifted in curiosity or caution. The old blacksmith limped out from his forge, squinting. "You kin to someone you used to ride through here?" he asked. She smiled. "You could say that." "What's your name, Marshal?" She untied her coat, just enough for the badge to shine clearly. "Mary Beth Silas Carter." The name rolled through the air like thunder in dry hills, and something in the bones of the town shifted, like the final breath of a curse finally exhaled. Mary Beth nodded once to the blacksmith, then walked the length of Dustbone. She passed the old saloon ruins. She touched the cottonwood, where the ground still seemed to breathe memory. She didn't say much. She didn't have to. She carried the law now. But more than that, she carried legacy. And around her neck, beneath the marshal's badge and weathered leather, hung a simple chain, once wrapped in cruelty, now forged in fire and remembrance. The girl who was once chained behind a cabin was no longer afraid. She was the justice her father and Silas had died for. And every time she rode into a new town, folks would feel it. The weight of a story not forgotten, the name never spoken but always heard in the wind.